Most instructors would tell you that what this Navy SEAL did was wrong and goes against the fundamental principles of CQB. And without a doubt, if I posted videos of me doing that online, everybody with an avatar and an opinion would show up to tell me how it was wrong. But they tend to show up less when I use training videos from what everyone probably considers the most elite fighting forces on the planet to make my point. So while every military-age male with a considerable amount of CQB training would tell you it's wrong, I'm going to point out why it isn't. First, you need to understand that while the skill of CQB in law enforcement is the least likely skill you will need to save your life as an officer, there are people out there who believe you can't talk about CQB unless you have night vision, a laser attached to your rifle, and a testosterone level above 900. And if you don't get there by flying in on a Black Hawk or raid the wrong house, you don't know what you're talking about. Most tactical training is conducted in an environment with a lot of order, including CQB. And when everything is orderly, we tend to become comfortable with a certain degree of predictability, which typically is absent of human factors that influence both the suspect and the officer's behavior. The problem with training in an environment with constant order is that you will set unrealistic expectations that won't transfer over to a chaotic environment, which is relatively unpredictable and often exposes those expectations. We know that those unrealistic expectations built into the orderly environment get exposed because when an officer gets seriously hurt or killed, we say, hey, that shit didn't work, so now we need to make the adjustment, which usually translates to changing tactics and TTPs. The good news is that you can limit the amount of chaos that disrupts your order by having a conversation about failure beforehand instead of after your buddy's funeral, which is what we're going to do here. One of the first things that you should hear when you take a CQB course is that the last thing that you want to do is end up in a room with a bad guy with a gun who's waiting to kill you, but just in case you do because you have to go in there, or you go in there and you don't know he's in there waiting for you, what you're going to learn here today, the tactics and techniques that you learn here today, are going to give you the best chances at limiting the levels of destruction. And you notice how I didn't say winning. And all the tactics that you do should be based off of the standard, which is a bad guy with a gun waiting to kill you. If this standard doesn't exist here or in any other scenario or any other environment, then it doesn't matter how you got there. You could walk backwards into the room or do a cartwheel into the room your whole career, and you could tell everybody how successful it was when the standard didn't exist. Next, we need to look at time on target, which is how long does it take us to put accurate rounds in vital areas when the standard exists. The goal here is that we reduce the amount of time it takes us to complete that task. So I'm going to go over two entry techniques, dumping into the room or stepping center before going into the room. Traditionally, teams or instructors, they only teach one way, right? So they're going to collectively, as a team, decide we prefer dumping into the room, which I would say the vast majority of teams or instructors teach that because it aligns with the principles of CQB, which is speed, surprise, and violence of action. And then there is stepping center before going into the room. Teams generally don't do either or because that's a TTP, and if you're in the stack, you're 1 or you're 2, you really kind of want to know or have a good understanding of what that person is going to do, so it reduces the things that you have to be thinking about in that moment. So I'm going to go over just a little bit of the fundamental principles of CQB as it relates to the 1 and the 2-man. So if this is the room that we're going into, the one and 2-man's responsibility are going to be the hard corners. So if they were dumping into the room and the 1-man was going to take the path of least resistance, he's going to go to this corner, or at least see this corner first, the hard corner, and then collapse the room back down. As that's happening simultaneously, this guy's getting his back, checking off on that corner, collapsing the room back down, and that's as far as I'm going to take this. So if we come back out, and the 1-man button hooks into the room instead of taking the path of least resistance, the number 2-man would check off on this corner, and they would collapse the room back down. And that's what dumping into the room would look like. Now, the problem with dumping into the room when the standard exists is that neither the 1-man or the 2-man see any part of the room before they actually start executing their responsibility of covering their hard corners. So the 1-man's here initially, the 2-man button hooks here, and as they're collapsing the room back down, the 3-man would be stepping into the room and he would be checking center and back within 1 meter of his partner. But when the standard exists, what actually happens is as soon as the bad guy sees the good guy breaking the threshold, he starts shooting he never sees it coming. He's probably going to get shot. The number 2 guy who comes in is button hooking. He doesn't know where the gunfire is coming from if he even makes it into the room. And his responsibility is to check off in the corner, because could the gunfire be coming from over there? Yes, it could. His responsibility is dedicated to going opposite of the one man and checking off in his corner. So that's what he's going to do. And then, maybe he gets hit too. So now we got 2 guys in the room, and then the number 3 guy comes in, and theoretically, he's now checking the center of the room. Maybe if they've made it there, they're doing that simultaneously and engaging that person. The problem with that is that that takes way too long. And there's a faster way to deal with that problem, and that is stepping center into the room. Stepping center before going into the room. So as the one man and the 2 man are approaching, instead of just simply dumping into the room without checking any part of the room, the number 1 man will take a wide step center to check off on what he can see here, and maybe there's a gunfight here. So maybe he either gets hit or is able to engage back, in which case at least he saw possibly where the gunfire was coming from. And as this is happening, he's not going to probably go into the room at that point, and the number 2 man is also going to want to get involved. So now we possibly have 2 guns into the fight, and none of us are trapped or stuck inside of the room. And so that would be stepping center. And so very simply, again, with pretty much all tactics, if this is the standard and we want to reduce the amount of time it takes us to get on target, you have to ask yourself, if we move the bad guy throughout the room within the view of where the one man could be seeing if he was stepping center, would he not have an opportunity to shoot the bad guy sooner if he steps center anywhere in this area versus dumping into the room and never seeing where the bad guy is shooting from initially? And that is why stepping center is probably the most preferred method before going into the room, because what people tend to not really express or tell you is that the last thing that you want to do is end up in a room with the bad guy with a gun. Now, going over what the Navy SEAL did and what most people would say is incorrect, the Navy SEAL actually did what pretty much everybody is not an advocate for, which is a threshold evaluation. So as he's approaching, he's actually looking into the room and collapsing the room down from the outside, because you should be doing as much of the work from the outside as you can. So he's collapsing the room down from the outside. By the time he gets center and he's starting to move forward, he sees the bad guy in the center, so he shoots that guy, and that's fine. He continues to move, and as he continues to move and makes up his mind that he's going to go left, he starts continuing to collapse the room down before actually committing to his corner. And what does that allow him to do? That allows him to, before he breaks the threshold, see the bad guy over here and engage the bad guy from outside the room. And then, the video doesn't continue, but what I would assume is that he then hit his corner and collapsed the room back down as the number 2 guy flows in behind him and checks basically the only area that hasn't been checked here. And so that is the preferred method. That's why he did that, and that would be correct. And pretty much everybody would tell you that him continuing to scan the room from outside here and stopping, because he did stop to take those shots, would be wrong. And I disagree with that. So if you're conducting CQB and you are doing the dumping method, then ask yourself, if we step center, are we putting accurate rounds in vital areas on, when the standard exists, faster than if we dumped into the room? And the answer is always going to be yes.